What if we are not the first? Not the first intelligent species. Not the first civilization to burn through resources and reshape the planet. Not the first to build, expand, and disappear. What if something came before us, ran the same experiment we are running right now, and left behind exactly the kind of evidence we would leave behind? The kind that looks like a natural event. The kind that gets a name in a geology textbook, and no further questions. Two NASA-affiliated scientists published a formal paper in 2018 asking exactly this, not as speculation, as a technical problem. They modelled what would survive in the geological record if a civilization like ours had existed tens of millions of years ago. Buildings gone in thousands of years, metal gone in tens of thousands, plastics gone in hundreds of thousands. What remains after 50 million years is a thin chemical layer in ancient rock, an unusual carbon signal, a fingerprint with no owner attached to it. Then they looked at the geological record, and they found a fingerprint. 56 million years ago, something released more carbon into the atmosphere than all of human industry combined. Fast, massive, with a chemical signature that points to one source above everything else: organic material. Burned or decomposed biological matter, the same fingerprint as fossil fuels, the same fingerprint as industrial output, and no complete natural explanation for where it came from. Why is that not the headline every time someone talks about ancient Earth? Why does the published science on this event still have an open gap in it after 30 years of research? And why did the two scientists who formally connected these dots publish their paper and then get almost no response from the field? That is what this is about. Not mythology, not conspiracy, the actual data. Because once you see what the data shows, the question stops being whether something was here before us. The question becomes why we are so reluctant to say it out loud. Here is the thing about the geological record that nobody tells you up front. It does not preserve what happened. It preserves the chemical aftermath of what happened. There is a difference. A big one. Think of it like a fire. After a fire burns down a building, what do you find? Ash, charred material, heat signatures in the surrounding soil. You can tell a fire happened. You can measure how hot it burned. But you cannot tell from the ash alone what the building looked like, who built it, or why it burned. The event leaves a chemical trace. The story behind the event does not survive. The geological record works the same way. And 56 million years ago, something left a chemical trace that scientists have been trying to explain ever since. The event is called the PETM. Between 3 and 7 trillion tons of carbon hit the atmosphere over a few thousand years. Temperatures jumped up to 8 degrees. A third of all deep sea life went extinct. The planet spent 200,000 years recovering. This is not a disputed event. The data is solid. Thousands of papers, core samples from every ocean on Earth. The trace is right there in the rock. So what left that trace? What burned? What released 3 to 7 trillion tons of carbon with a biological fingerprint in what is, by geological standards, an instant? The current explanation involves volcanic activity, frozen methane deposits thawing out, and shifts in Earth's orbit. All three are real. All three contribute. And when you total them up, you come up short. The carbon in the rock is more than the known natural sources can produce. That gap has been sitting in the published literature for 30 years. Noted. Discussed in footnotes. Never closed. Something else was there. Something biological. Something that burned at scale. And we have not identified it. Before you can understand why the carbon fingerprint of the PETM is a problem, you need to understand one thing. Just one. The rest follows automatically. Carbon comes in two versions, light and heavy, same element, one neutron difference in weight. Living things prefer the light version. Every plant, every animal, every organism on Earth takes in more light carbon than heavy. So anything made from once living matter, coal, oil, gas, wood, carries more light carbon. That is its fingerprint. Volcanic carbon is different. It comes from deep in the earth with no biological history and carries more heavy carbon. Two distinct fingerprints, measurable, reliable. Geochemists use this the way a doctor uses a blood type. It tells you where something came from. The PETM carbon has the biological fingerprint, light carbon, organic source. Every measurement over 30 years confirms this. It is not in dispute. The carbon that caused one of the largest extinction events in recent Earth history looks exactly like burned or decomposed biological material. Not volcanic rock. Not a deep Earth process. Something that was once alive. Now here is the question the textbooks skip. What biological source on Earth was large enough to release 3 to 7 trillion tons of carbon in a few thousand years? The thawing methane deposits on the ocean floor are biological in origin, and they fit the fingerprint. But they do not cover the full volume. The volcanic contribution has the wrong fingerprint entirely, which means whatever fills the remaining gap also has to look biological. Organic, fast, massive. What natural process does that? Scientists have proposed candidates. None of them close the gap completely. And here is my position on that. When the most studied rapid carbon event in Earth history has a fingerprint pointing at biological origin and a volume no natural explanation fully accounts for, the honest answer is that we do not know what caused it. Not completely. And that open answer is exactly where the next piece of this story begins. In 2018, a NASA scientist named Gavin Schmidt and a physicist named Adam Frank published a paper with a straightforward title and an uncomfortable conclusion. The paper asked, if an industrial civilization had existed on Earth before humans, would we know? They were not writing fiction. They ran a real model. They looked at what survives geological time and what does not. Concrete breaks down in thousands of years. Steel corrodes in tens of thousands. Plastic degrades within centuries to a few millennia. Nuclear waste leaves isotopic traces but fades over millions of years. What remains after 50 million years is chemistry. A thin layer in ancient rock. Unusual ratios of certain elements. A carbon signal with a biological fingerprint that arrived fast and in large volume. Exactly the kind of signal you would look at and call a natural anomaly if you did not know what produced it. Their conclusion was direct. A civilization comparable to ours could have existed, built, burned through its resources, and collapsed. And the geological record would not identify it as a civilization. It would look like a geochemical event. It would get a name and a date and a place in the literature. And the question of what caused it would remain, officially, open. Now look at the PETM again. Biological carbon fingerprint. Volume that exceeds the known natural sources. Rate of release comparable to large-scale industrial output. An open gap in the explanation that 30 years of research has not closed. Sitting in rock that is 56 million years old. At a time when this planet had already been habitable for hundreds of millions of years. Frank and Schmidt were not writing about the PETM, but what they produced is a precise description of what we should expect to find if something industrial contributed to it. Every anomaly the PETM contains fits exactly inside the blind spot their model identified. Is this proof? No. But here's what it is. It is two independent lines of published science pointing at the same gap. One says we would not be able to tell the difference. One shows us a difference we cannot explain. And the fact that almost nobody has put those two things in the same sentence is not because the connection is not there. It is because following it requires asking a question that the field is not built to ask. Something left that fingerprint. We know what the fingerprint looks like. We do not know what made it. And we now have a formal scientific framework proving we may never be able to know for certain either way. What happened after two NASA-affiliated scientists formally published the most uncomfortable question in modern geology? Nothing. The paper came out. Science publications covered it. And then the field moved on. No follow-up studies, no funded research programs, no teams formed to test the hypothesis against the geological record. 7 years of silence from the institutions best positioned to pursue it. That is worth sitting with. In science, when a real question gets published by credentialed researchers, the normal response is engagement. Other scientists test it, challenge it, try to break it. That process is how the field moves forward. It is also how the field protects itself from bad ideas. The absence of that process is not neutral. It is a signal. So why the silence? Is the question obviously wrong? Frank and Schmidt modeled it carefully. The logic holds. Is it because nobody noticed? It was covered in mainstream science media when it came out. Or is it because the question points somewhere that the institutions collectively decided not to follow? Not through conspiracy. Through something simpler. Nobody wants to be the scientist who built a career on this and turned out to be wrong. The professional cost is asymmetric. Ask the question and get it wrong, and your credibility takes a permanent hit. Stay quiet, and nothing happens to you personally. Here is the dark part. We have spent decades and billions of dollars searching for signs of life on Mars. Sterile rock, no atmosphere, no oceans, no biological history. And 2 scientists formally ask whether the signs of a previous civilization could be sitting in our own geological record right now, chemically indistinguishable from a natural event. And the response is a shrug. We are the species that points expensive telescopes at dead planets looking for microbes, while leaving a formally published question about our own geological record sitting unanswered for 7 years. What does that tell you about what we are actually afraid to find? What would you actually find if you came back to Earth 50 million years from now and started looking for us? Not what you hope, what the physics allows. Because those 2 things are very different, and the gap between them is where everything in this story lives. Start with the obvious. Cities, gone. Without maintenance, structures collapse within thousands of years. Erosion, vegetation, geological pressure do the rest. A modern city left alone for 1 million years is chemically unusual soil. For 50 million years, it is just soil. No outline, no foundation, no indication anything with a mind stood there. Plastics. We produce over 400 million tons per year. We talk about plastic pollution like it is a permanent mark on the planet. It is not. Plastics break down within hundreds of thousands of years. In geological terms, that is nothing. It is gone before the next ice age completes its cycle. Nuclear material lasts longer. Some isotopes have half-lives in the millions of years. A future civilization with sensitive enough instruments might find anomalous readings at certain locations. Without context, those readings look like natural geological variation. They do not look like a power plant. They do not look like anything made on purpose. So what actually survives 50 million years? Isotope ratios locked into carbonate rock. Trace metals concentrated where industrial activity happened. Carbon volume and fingerprint recorded in ocean sediment. That is the complete list. No structures, no objects, no indication that anything intelligent produced any of it. Just chemistry. Just numbers in a layer of rock that mean nothing until someone knows exactly what to look for. Here is the part that should stop you cold. We are the first civilization in Earth's history sophisticated enough to read that chemical record. And we are currently spending our resources looking for microbes on Mars, while leaving a formally published question about our own geological record sitting unanswered for 7 years. What does it say about us that we find that acceptable? Here is a thought experiment, not a comfortable one. Take everything humans have built and done since the Industrial Revolution. Every city, every road, every power plant, every mine, every landfill, every ship, every plane, every piece of plastic in every ocean. All of it. Now leave it alone for 50 million years and come back. What do you find? The cities are sediment. The roads are trace metal anomalies in a narrow layer of compressed earth. The plastics are gone. The nuclear material has decayed to faint isotopic signatures that look, without context, like natural geological variation. The entire physical record of human civilization has compressed into a few centimeters of chemically unusual rock. The clearest signal by far is the carbon. 150 years of industrial output has added roughly 500 billion tons of biologically fingerprinted carbon to the atmosphere. That carbon, recorded in ocean sediment and carbonate rock over geological time, produces exactly the kind of isotopic anomaly that survives 50 million years. Elevated, biological in origin, fast by geological standards. With a volume that, depending on what modeling assumptions you use, may or may not be fully accounted for by the processes your field has identified. Does that last sentence sound familiar? Because that is the PETM. Exactly, not approximately. The same type of signal. The same open volume question. The same biological fingerprint sitting in rock from a time when this planet had already been habitable for hundreds of millions of years. And the same institutional response, which is to note the anomaly, name the event, and leave the gap in the explanation open indefinitely. Here is my position on that. When you build a model of what a vanished civilization looks like, and then you find something in the geological record that matches that model in every measurable category, the intellectually honest response is not to immediately conclude that is what it is. But it is also not to immediately conclude that it definitely is not. The honest response is to pursue the question seriously. We have not done that. We filed the anomaly and moved on. That is not science being careful. That is science being comfortable. How long does it actually take for a civilization to appear, expand, and vanish without a trace? Not long. That is the answer. And the specific number makes the PETM significantly harder to dismiss. Modern humans have existed for roughly 300,000 years. In that time, we went from stone tools to nuclear weapons to measurably altering the chemistry of the planet's atmosphere. 300,000 years. From nothing to rewriting the planet. Now look at the PETM. The event lasted roughly 200,000 years, shorter than our entire existence as a species. That window is enough time for everything we have done, and everything we will ever do, to happen and disappear completely. Every city, every road, every power plant, every war, every discovery. It all fits inside what geologists describe as a brief climatic episode. Now, here is the question nobody in a mainstream institution has formally asked. The Earth has been habitable for complex life for 600 million years. Modern humans represent 1/20th of 1% of that window. What is the probability that we are the first intelligent species to appear in a 600 million year window on a planet chemically favorable to complex biology for that entire duration? Nobody has calculated that probability seriously, because calculating it seriously requires taking the Silurian Hypothesis seriously. And we already know what happens when you do that. Silence. The PETM happened 56 million years ago. Complex mammals already existed. The biological raw material for intelligence was present on this planet. The event lasted long enough for something to rise, expand, collapse, and leave nothing but chemistry. And the chemical signature it left behind matches, in every measurable category, what Frank and Schmidt showed a vanished industrial civilization would look like. We are not the only species in 600 million years that could have done this. We are just the only one currently doing it. Those are not the same statement, and treating them as the same statement is not science. It is assumption dressed up as conclusion. What would it take to treat that difference as worth investigating? Now here is where the past stops being the past. The rate of carbon increase in the atmosphere right now sits in the same range as the rate at the beginning of the PETM. Not identical. Comparable. The temperature projections for the end of this century land at the low end of the temperature jump that defined that event. The isotopic fingerprint of our industrial output matches the PETM signal. Biological source, fast release, elevated above baseline. We are not analogous to whatever caused the PETM. We are chemically identical to it. Think about what that means if the Silurian hypothesis is even partially correct. The event that carries their fingerprint is also an extinction event. Deep sea ecosystems that had been stable for tens of millions of years collapsed. Species that had survived every previous disruption did not survive this one. Whatever produced that carbon signal did not make it to the other side. The record ends with the spike, the warming, and the extinctions. No second chapter, no recovery story. Just a layer in the rock and an open question. And here we are, writing the same entry into the same record. With instruments precise enough to watch ourselves do it in real time. Here is my position. Either something industrial contributed to the PETM, and we are looking at a direct precedent for what happens next. Or the PETM was entirely natural, and we have managed, through our own industrial output, to accidentally reproduce the chemical signature of one of the largest extinction events in recent Earth history. Both options are serious. Neither one is being treated with the urgency it deserves. We found the fingerprint. We matched it. And the person whose job it is to tell us what that means has not been funded to find out. What does it take to make that the most important question in science? What if we are not the exception? What if we are the pattern? Everything we have covered so far points in one direction. A carbon event with an organic fingerprint and an unexplained volume gap. A formal scientific model proving we cannot distinguish that event from industrial output at geological timescales. 7 years of institutional silence after the question was formally published. And a chemical match between the PETM signal and what we are producing right now. But here is the piece that makes all of it worse. We assumed throughout this that the problem is finding evidence of something that came before us. We have been asking whether the geological record could show us a previous civilization. That is the wrong question. The right question is whether the geological record could show us a previous civilization even in principle. And the answer Frank and Schmidt gave us is no. Think about what that actually means. We are not dealing with a situation where the evidence exists, and we have not found it yet. We are dealing with a situation where the evidence, by the laws of geological time, cannot exist in a form we would recognize. The signal survives. The story behind the signal does not. We would find the fingerprint and call it a natural event. We would publish a paper with an open gap in the explanation. We would note the anomaly and move on, which is exactly what we did with the PETM 30 years ago, and have been doing ever since. Here is the darkest version of this. We are not looking for something we have not found. We may have already found it, named it, studied it extensively, and filed it under natural causes because we did not build the framework to recognize it for what it was until 2018. And even after we built that framework, we did not go back and apply it seriously. We found the answer. We just did not recognize it as one. What does it mean when absence of evidence is not evidence of absence? In most situations, that phrase is a logical caveat, a way of saying we should not draw conclusions from incomplete data. But in this specific case, it is not a caveat. It is a physical law. The geological record does not preserve civilizations. It preserves chemistry. Those are different things, and confusing them has consequences. Here is what we actually know from the geological record about the deep past. We know what chemicals were in the atmosphere. We know what the global temperature was. We know which species existed and which went extinct. We know the volume and isotopic composition of major carbon events. What we cannot know from the geological record alone is whether any of those events had an intelligent cause. The record is not built to carry that information. It was never going to carry that information. 50 million years of geological processing removes the signal that would tell you the difference. So when scientists say there is no evidence of a previous civilization, they are saying something technically accurate that is also deeply misleading. There is no evidence we can currently interpret as a previous civilization. That is not the same thing. The first statement implies the record is clean. The second statement acknowledges the record is blind in a specific and relevant way. We built entire fields of science on the assumption that absence of evidence is evidence of absence. Astrobiology, CT, origin of life research, all of them operate on the implicit assumption that if something significant happened, we would be able to find the trace of it. Frank and Schmidt showed that assumption is wrong, at least for civilizations, at least at geological timescales, and nobody in those fields has seriously updated their framework in response. Here is my position on that. We do not know that something was here before us. We also cannot know that something was not. Those two positions are not symmetric. One of them is comfortable. One of them requires changing how we think about our place in Earth's history. And we have, collectively, chosen the comfortable one without doing the work to justify it. The PETM fingerprint is in the rock. The gap in the explanation is in the literature. And the framework that connects them has been sitting in a peer-reviewed journal since 2018 with almost nobody looking directly at it. What are we waiting for? What do you build when you have just watched the world end? 12,800 years ago, something ended a world. Not metaphorically, physically. In a window that geology measures in decades, the climate of the entire northern hemisphere shifted. Temperatures dropped sharply. Vast ecosystems that had been stable for tens of thousands of years collapsed. A culture that had spread across an entire continent disappeared so completely that for decades we did not know it had existed. Gone. And right in the middle of that collapse, within a few generations, somebody started building the most sophisticated structure on Earth. Not a shelter, not a defensive wall. A complex of massive carved stone pillars, arranged with astronomical precision, decorated with images that researchers are still working to fully decode. At a site called Gobekli Tepe in what is now southeastern Turkey. Dated to roughly 11,500 years before the current era. 6,000 years before Stonehenge. 7,000 years before the Egyptian pyramids. Here is what the standard timeline says about the people who built it. They were hunter-gatherers. No writing, no agriculture, no state, no organized labor force. By every textbook definition of the word, they were not supposed to be capable of this. And here is my position on that. When the physical evidence contradicts the textbook, the correct response is to question the textbook, not to explain away the evidence. Gobekli Tepe exists. The dating is solid. The complexity is not in dispute. What is in dispute is how people at that stage of development built it. And the answer that nobody wants to say out loud is that they were not at that stage of development. They knew things we have not accounted for. Things they learned, or inherited, or preserved from something that came before the catastrophe. The fingerprint is not just in the rock. It is in the stone. What were they trying to remember? How do you prove something hit the Earth 12,800 years ago? Same way you prove anything in geology. You read what the event left behind. And in this case, what it left behind is specific, measurable, and sitting in locations that have no other explanation. Nanodiamonds, tiny crystals of carbon that form only under extreme pressure and temperature. The kind produced by a high-velocity cosmic impact. You cannot make nanodiamonds with a volcanic eruption. You cannot make them with a flood or a storm or a climate shift. There is a very short list of processes that produce them at this scale. That list has one item on it. They were found at over 50 separate sites across 4 continents: North America, Europe, Asia, the Middle East, all in the same stratigraphic layer, all dated to the same narrow window around 12,800 years ago. Not approximately the same window, the same layer. The kind of synchronicity that in geology means one event, not several. Along with the nanodiamonds, researchers found magnetic microspherules, tiny spheres of metal that form when rock melts rapidly and cools in air. Iridium, rare on Earth's surface but common in asteroids. Shocked quartz, grains deformed by pressures far beyond anything geological processes produce, all in the same layer, all at the same time, all over the planet. The meltwater hypothesis explains the cooling. It does not explain the nanodiamonds. It does not explain the iridium. It does not explain synchronized continental fires recorded in the same layer across 3 continents. 2 explanations exist for the Younger Dryas. One covers the cooling, one covers the entire list of physical evidence. We chose the one that covers less. Why does the explanation that accounts for more evidence get treated as the fringe position? In 2018, the same year Frank and Schmidt published the Silurian Hypothesis, a different team announced something else entirely. Under 900 meters of Greenland ice, they had found a crater, 31 kilometers across, hidden under the ice sheet for so long that nobody knew it was there until radar mapping technology became sensitive enough to see through the ice. A hole in the bedrock large enough to fit a major city inside with room to spare. The initial dating placed the impact at roughly 12,800 years ago. Think about what that means physically. A rock large enough to carve a 31-kilometer crater hit the northern ice sheet at the exact moment the world was ending. The impact would have instantly vaporized billions of tons of ice. That water and debris would have entered the atmosphere within hours. The shockwave would have crossed the continent. The heat pulse would have ignited fires across a vast radius. The material thrown into the atmosphere by the force of the collision would have spread globally within days. Now look at the evidence layer again. Nanodiamonds, iridium, magnetic microspherules, synchronized continental fires, all in the same layer, all consistent with exactly what a high-velocity impact into a northern ice sheet would produce and distribute globally. The dating of the Hiawatha crater was later revised by some researchers. The debate on precise timing is ongoing and legitimate, but here is what that debate does not change. The crater exists. An impact of that scale in that region was physically possible, and the evidence layer from 12,800 years ago looks exactly like what that kind of event leaves behind. We have the hole in the ground, we have the chemistry in the rock, we have the physical markers distributed globally at the same moment. What exactly is missing before we take this seriously? What happened to the Clovis people? They were the first humans in North America, spread across an entire continent over thousands of years. Sophisticated hunters with precision tools found at sites from Canada to the tip of South America. Not a struggling population, a thriving one. And then, within one human generation, their distinctive tools stop appearing in the archaeological record entirely. Not a gradual decline, not a slow migration. One layer they are there, the next layer they are not. The standard explanation is overhunting combined with climate stress. Human hunters drove the megafauna to extinction, the food web collapsed, the culture disappeared. That is a coherent story. It works on paper, and it has one specific problem. Overhunting is gradual. It takes generations. It leaves a trail in the record of declining populations, shifting strategies, cultural adaptation. The Clovis disappearance does not look gradual. It aligns, within the resolution of available dating methods, with the impact evidence layer, with the nanodiamonds, with the iridium, with the synchronized fires. One boundary, one moment. Everything changes at once. Here is my position. Science prefers the simpler explanation. That preference is usually correct, and it is a reasonable default. But simple and correct are not the same thing. And when the simpler explanation cannot account for the physical evidence in the rock, it stops being science and starts being comfort. The people who built the most sophisticated tools in the Western Hemisphere at that time vanished in a generation. At the exact moment, the sky was apparently doing something catastrophic, and the mainstream account of their disappearance does not include what the rock says happened above their heads. Why are we more comfortable with a story that fits our prior assumptions than with the one that fits the evidence? Here's the number that breaks the overhunting explanation completely. Not one continent, 4. In the same narrow window around 12,800 years ago, North American megafauna went extinct. Mammoths, mastodons, horses, camels, giant ground sloths. At the same time, woolly mammoths in Eurasia declined sharply. Large fauna in Australia showed disruption in the same window. The same pattern repeating across ecosystems with no contact between them, no shared human population, no shared climate event severe enough on its own to explain simultaneous collapse across the entire northern hemisphere. Gone. All of them. At the same time, hunting pressure is local. A human population in North America driving mammoths to extinction has no mechanism for simultaneously affecting woolly mammoths in Siberia. These populations were not in contact. They were not coordinating. Whatever reached them all at roughly the same moment was not a hunting strategy. It was not a gradual climate shift. It was something that did not care which continent it was affecting. Synchronized global extinction requires a synchronized global cause. The meltwater pulse provides a regional cooling mechanism. Regional cooling does not explain 4 continents losing their largest animals in the same geological instant. An impact event does. An impact large enough to distribute ejecta globally, ignite continental fires, and disrupt food chains across multiple hemispheres simultaneously does. We have the extinctions on 4 continents. We have the evidence layer with the physical markers of an impact. We have the crater under the Greenland ice. And we have a consensus explanation that accounts for one piece of this and treats the rest as coincidence. Here is what I keep coming back to. The people who disappeared in that window, the Clovis culture, the megafauna, whatever else was erased, they left exactly the kind of record that Frank and Schmidt told us a vanished civilization leaves. Chemistry, anomalies, open gaps in the explanation, a fingerprint with no name attached to it. 2 events separated by 56 million years. Both leave the same kind of record. Both have the same kind of gap in the explanation. Both get the same institutional response. What are the odds that is a coincidence? If the impact evidence is real, why is it not the consensus? That is the question that exposes something uncomfortable about how science actually works in practice. Not how it is supposed to work, how it works. The meltwater hypothesis has been the dominant explanation for the Younger Dryas since the 1980s. Decades of papers built on top of it, careers constructed around it, funding allocated to research that assumes it. When the impact evidence started appearing in the early 2000s, it did not enter a neutral playing field. It entered a field where the existing explanation had institutional momentum, where the people most qualified to evaluate the new evidence were also the people whose work was built on the old explanation. That is not a conspiracy. That is a structural problem. Here is what the meltwater hypothesis actually explains. The cooling, the disruption of ocean circulation, the regional climate shift. Those are real effects, and the mechanism for them is solid. Here is what it does not explain. The nanodiamonds on 4 continents, the iridium, the synchronized continental fires, the simultaneous megafaunal extinctions across ecosystems with no contact between them. Every one of those data points requires a separate ad hoc explanation if you commit to the meltwater model alone. Each one individually sounds plausible. All of them together require you to believe in a remarkable series of coincidences happening at the exact same geological moment. Science is supposed to prefer the explanation that accounts for the most evidence with the fewest additional assumptions. By that standard, the impact hypothesis wins. It has not won. And the reason it has not won is not because the evidence is weak. It is because changing the consensus at this point requires admitting that an entire generation of research was built on an incomplete foundation. We are not talking about bad science. We are talking about institutional inertia. The difference matters. Bad science corrects itself when shown the evidence. Institutional inertia corrects itself only when the generation that built the consensus retires. How many other questions are we getting wrong for exactly the same reason? What do you do with knowledge that the world around you is trying to erase? The people who survived whatever happened 12,800 years ago did not just survive physically, they survived with information. They knew something had happened. They knew what the sky looked like when it ended. They knew the sequence of events. They knew that the world they had been living in was gone, and that the world they were now living in was a diminished version of it. And they knew, the way anyone who has lost something irreplaceable knows, that the knowledge itself was now at risk. You cannot write it down if you do not have writing. You cannot store it in a library if you do not have libraries. What you can do is put it in stone, literally. Carve it into rock large enough that it will outlast the next catastrophe, the one after that, and the one after that. Make it big enough that whoever comes next cannot miss it. Make it complex enough that it takes real effort to decode, because anything that takes real effort to decode gets studied by the people who find it. That is what Gobekli Tepe looks like when you stop asking what it is and start asking what it is for. Not a temple in the religious sense, not a place where people gathered to pray, a storage device, a hard drive carved in limestone, buried under its own fill to preserve it, located at a high point in the landscape where it would survive whatever came next. Built by people who had just watched a world end and who understood, with a clarity we have never had to develop, that information is the most fragile thing that exists. Here is my position. The sophistication of Gobekli Tepe is not evidence that hunter-gatherers were smarter than we thought. It is evidence that the people who built it were not starting from zero. They were preserving something. The question is what? What do you carve in stone when you are trying to warn the next civilization? What would it take to build Gobekli Tepe? Start with the logistics. The site consists of at least 20 circular enclosures, each containing multiple T-shaped limestone pillars. The largest pillars are over 5 meters tall and weigh up to 10 tons. They were quarried from bedrock roughly 500 meters away, transported without wheels or draft animals, and raised into position with a precision that modern engineers find impressive. The site covers an area of roughly 90,000 square meters. Current estimates suggest the construction required a sustained, organized workforce of hundreds of people over an extended period. Now remember who is supposed to have built it. Hunter-gatherers. People who, by the standard model of prehistoric development, had no surplus food production, no permanent settlements, no administrative structure capable of organizing large-scale labor, and no reason to invest this kind of effort in a non-utilitarian structure. Here is what that model requires you to believe. That people with no agriculture somehow fed a construction workforce of hundreds over years. That people with no permanent settlements somehow coordinated complex multi-year building projects. That people with no writing somehow transmitted the astronomical knowledge encoded in the site across multiple generations of builders. Every one of these requirements contradicts the standard timeline, not slightly, fundamentally. Klaus Schmidt, the archaeologist who excavated Gobekli Tepe for decades until his death in 2014, proposed that the construction itself drove the development of agriculture. Workers needed food. Feeding workers required farming. The temple came first. The agriculture followed. That flips the standard model completely, and it implies that something motivated the construction before agriculture existed. Something urgent enough to organize massive collective effort without any of the infrastructure we assume is necessary for such effort. You do not build something this complex without a reason that feels more important than immediate survival. What was that reason? And why did it require encoding astronomical information in the stone? What is carved on Pillar 43 at Gobekli Tepe, and why does the date it encodes matter? Pillar 43, called the Vulture Stone, is one of the most decorated pillars at the site. It shows a collection of animals arranged in specific positions. A vulture with a raised wing, a scorpion, a headless human figure. Other animals positioned around them in a configuration that, at first reading, looks like a hunting scene or a mythological narrative. Researchers from the University of Edinburgh looked at it differently. They treated the animal figures as star constellations and map their positions against the actual night sky at different historical dates using astronomical software. The configuration on the pillar matches the sky as it appeared on a specific date, around 10,950 years before the current era. That date is the beginning of the Younger Dryas, not approximately, not in the general vicinity. The astronomical configuration encoded in the stone corresponds to the moment the catastrophe began, the moment the comet, or whatever it was, hit, the moment the world ended. Now ask yourself what that means. The people who built Gobekli Tepe were not decorating their walls with hunting scenes. They were recording a date, the most important date in their history, the date that divided everything into before and after. They encoded it in a form that would survive long after the people who understood it were gone, in a medium that does not degrade, using a reference system, the positions of stars, that any future civilization with basic astronomy could read. Here is my position on that. You only do that if you are trying to communicate across time, not to your children, not to your grandchildren, to whoever comes after the next catastrophe, to whoever is standing where you are standing 1,000 years from now, or 10,000, wondering what happened. They left a timestamp in stone. For us. And we almost missed what it was pointing at. What else did they encode that we have not decoded yet? Here is the thing about Gobekli Tepe that the standard framing never quite says directly. It was buried deliberately, not abandoned, not covered by natural accumulation over centuries. Buried. The people who built it, or their immediate descendants, systematically filled the enclosures with rubble and soil and sealed the site. They covered what they had spent generations building. And then they left. Why do you bury something you spent that much effort constructing? You bury it to protect it. You bury it because you know what happened before and you know it can happen again. You bury it because a structure on the surface is vulnerable to the same forces that ended the world once already. And a structure under 3 meters of compacted fill survives almost anything, including another impact, including another 1,000 years of climate chaos, including the complete collapse of whatever civilization comes next. They were not building for themselves, they were building for us. The entire site is a message in a bottle, sealed and thrown into geological time, designed to be found by whoever was still around to look. Think about what it means to be on the receiving end of that message. You are standing at a site that is older than writing, older than cities, older than agriculture as we understand it. Built by people who had no business being able to build it by every standard metric we apply to prehistoric development. Filled with astronomical data pointing to a specific catastrophic date. Deliberately buried to survive what they clearly believed was coming again. They knew something was here before them. They survived it. And they built the most durable message they could to make sure we would know too. The fingerprint is not just in the rock. It is not just in the chemistry of ancient carbon. It is in the stone that someone carved with enormous effort and then hid underground for us to find. We found it. We are still arguing about what it means. How long does it take before we take the message seriously? What does water erosion on a limestone structure actually tell you? It tells you exactly when the structure was exposed to rain, not approximately, not roughly. The type of erosion, the depth of the weathering, the pattern of the channels cut into the rock, these are readable. Geologists do this routinely. They look at exposed rock surfaces and calculate how long they have been exposed to specific types of weather. It is not guesswork. It is applied physics. Robert Schoch is a geologist with a PhD from Yale. In 1990, he examined the limestone walls of the enclosure surrounding the Sphinx at Giza. What he found was vertical weathering channels, deep ones. The kind produced by prolonged exposure to heavy rainfall running down vertical surfaces. Not wind erosion, not sand abrasion, rain. The specific pattern that forms when water falls from above, hits a vertical stone surface repeatedly over centuries, and carves downward channels into the rock. Egypt has not had that kind of rainfall since before 5000 BCE. The last period of sustained heavy precipitation in the region ended roughly 7,000 years ago, when the climate shifted and the Sahara began its transition to desert. Which means the Sphinx enclosure was exposed to heavy rain before 5000 BCE. Which means it was built before 5000 BCE, which is roughly 2,500 years before the official dating places it. The official dating puts the Sphinx at approximately 2,500 BCE, during the reign of Pharaoh Khafra. That is based on historical records and stylistic comparison with other known structures of the period. Shocker's dating is based on the physics of how limestone weathers under rainfall. These two methods give incompatible answers. Here is what you do not hear often enough. The geological argument has not been physically refuted. It has been disputed by Egyptologists on historical and stylistic grounds. Those are legitimate grounds for dispute. They are not the same as showing that the erosion pattern is wrong. When two methods give different answers, which one do you trust? The pushback against shock came fast, and it came from a specific direction. Egyptologists argued that the Sphinx could not predate the Old Kingdom because there is no historical record of it from before that period. No inscriptions, no references in earlier texts, no evidence in the archaeological record of a pre-dynastic civilization sophisticated enough to carve it. If the Sphinx is 7,000 years old, where is the civilization that built it? Where are their cities, their tools, their waste middens, their other structures? That is a fair question. It is also exactly the question that Frank and Schmidt answered in 2018. Where are the remains of a civilization sophisticated enough to carve the Sphinx before 5000 BCE? In the same place, all pre-industrial remains go after 7,000 years of geological processing. Gone, it degraded, chemically absorbed into the surrounding environment, or underwater. Because sea levels were still rising during that period, and any coastal settlements from the era are now sitting under tens of meters of water in the Mediterranean, the Red Sea, and the Indian Ocean. The absence of corroborating archaeological evidence is not evidence against Shocker's geological argument. It is exactly what the geological argument predicts. A civilization that existed before the historical record, in a period of major climate disruption, with coastal settlements now underwater, would leave almost no surface trace. What it would leave is a structure carved into bedrock at a high elevation that displays the specific weathering pattern of its actual age, which is exactly what we have. Here is my position. The Egyptological objection is circular. We do not find evidence of a pre-dynastic civilization of this sophistication, therefore one could not have existed. Therefore the Sphinx cannot be that old. Therefore the geological evidence must be wrong. That is not an argument. That is an assumption protecting itself. The rock says what the rock says. What is the geological counter-argument? Here is a number that does not appear in most discussions of the Sphinx. 10,500 BCE. That is the date that results when you run the precession of the Earth's axis backward and ask what constellation was sitting on the eastern horizon at dawn on the spring equinox. Precession is a slow wobble in Earth's rotational axis that completes one full cycle roughly every 26,000 years. It is predictable. It is calculable to high precision. And it means that the position of the stars relative to the horizon changes slowly and measurably over millennia. At 10,500 BCE, on the dawn of the spring equinox, the constellation rising due east on the horizon was Leo, the lion. The Sphinx faces due east. It is a lion. At the moment of its astronomical alignment, it would have been looking directly at its own mirror image in the sky. That alignment does not exist at 2500 BCE. At 2500 BCE, the constellation rising on the spring equinox was Taurus. The Sphinx would have been looking at a bull, not a lion. If the Sphinx was built to mark the equinox, which many ancient structures were, it makes no astronomical sense at 2500 BCE. It makes perfect sense at 10,500 BCE. Now put the two pieces together. Schuck's geological dating places the Sphinx somewhere before 5000 BCE based on rainfall erosion. The astronomical alignment places a meaningful construction date at 10,500 BCE. These two independent lines of evidence, one geological, one astronomical, both point to a period far older than the official dating. They do not point to exactly the same date, but they both point away from 2500 BCE and toward a much older origin. You might think that two independent methods pointing in the same direction would generate serious scientific attention. You would be wrong about that. Look at a photograph of the Sphinx, not the face, the proportions. The body is enormous, massive. The haunches, the paws, the torso, they are scaled for a head that should be significantly larger than the one sitting on it now. The current head is visibly, obviously, disproportionately small relative to the body. This is not a subtle observation. It is immediately apparent to anyone who looks at the structure without prior assumptions about what they are supposed to see. The standard explanation is that the head was recarved. The original head, whatever it was, weathered badly in the open air over an extended period of time. When the pharaohs of the Old Kingdom encountered the structure, the original head was significantly eroded, and they recarved it into the image of a pharaoh to claim the monument as their own. This is not a fringe explanation. Many mainstream Egyptologists accept it. The head was recarved. The original is gone. Here is what that means. If the head was recarved, the original head was something else. What it was, nobody knows. The weathering that made recarving necessary also destroyed any evidence of what the original looked like. That information is gone. But here is what remains. The body, the enclosure walls, the geological weathering that Schock documented, the astronomical alignment, and the fact that someone, at some point before the historical record begins, carved a lion-bodied structure on the Giza Plateau and oriented it with precision toward the eastern horizon. Whoever they were, they knew enough about astronomy to encode a specific date in the orientation of a massive stone structure. They knew enough about engineering to carve something that has lasted at minimum 7,000 years, and possibly 12,000. And they did not leave a name, a text, or a single other surface structure that we can definitively connect to them. What happened to everything else they built? What do you build when you need to survive not an army, but the surface of the earth itself? In central Turkey, in the region called Cappadocia, there are underground cities. Not cellars, not tunnels, cities. Derinkuyu is the largest currently known. It extends 18 levels below the surface. It was designed to house roughly 20,000 people. It has ventilation shafts reaching from 200 feet underground to the surface, wells that reach the water table, stables for livestock, storage rooms for food, crushing stones that could seal individual tunnel sections from the inside. A complete, self-contained environment capable of sustaining a large human population with zero contact with the surface for an extended period of time. There are over 200 similar underground settlements in Cappadocia. They are connected to each other by tunnels extending for kilometers. The official explanation is that they were built as refugees from historical invaders. Arab raids in the Byzantine period, the Persian invasions, the general violence of the historical record in that region. Here is the problem with that explanation. Armies do not follow you 18 levels underground. An army laying siege to a position needs to cut off food and water, cut off the tunnels at the surface, and wait. At 3 to 5 levels underground, you are safe from an army. At 18 levels, with 3 years of stored food and an independent water supply, you are not hiding from soldiers. You are hiding from something that makes the surface uninhabitable for years. Think about what engineering requirement actually justifies 18 levels, independent air supply, independent water, multi-year food storage, and complete separation from the outside world. There is exactly one scenario that makes all of those design choices rational simultaneously. The surface becomes dangerous for an extended period. Not occupied by enemies, physically hostile, poisoned air, blocked sun, temperatures incompatible with survival. Who builds 18 levels underground unless they know what the surface can become? Here is the engineering argument that the historical invasion explanation cannot answer. A defensive structure optimized against human attackers has specific requirements. It needs to be difficult to enter from outside. It needs choke points where small numbers of defenders can hold off larger forces. It needs an exit route if the position becomes untenable. And it needs enough space and supplies for the time required to outlast a siege, which in historical terms means weeks to a few months at most. Derinkuyu meets none of these requirements optimally. The tunnels are narrow, which helps defense, but the depth is strategically useless against a human enemy. No attacking army in history has committed to an underground pursuit 18 levels deep. The logistics are impossible. The darkness alone would stop them. 3 levels would have been sufficient for any human military threat in the historical record of that region. The depth is the detail that breaks the invasion explanation. You do not go to 18 levels for soldiers. You go to 18 levels for something else entirely. Something that the depth itself helps you survive. And the only thing that depth provides, beyond what 3 or 5 levels already provide, is distance from the surface. More rock between you and whatever is happening above you. Now add the ventilation shafts. They are engineered to provide fresh air from the surface while remaining concealed and difficult to block from outside. That is a defensive feature against human attackers, but it is also the feature you need most urgently if the surface air itself has become toxic. If ash, or smoke, or chemical changes in the atmosphere have made breathing on the surface impossible, you need a ventilation system that filters and delivers breathable air from depth. Multi-year food storage, independent water, air filtration at depth, complete surface independence. Here is my position. You do not build this for the threats that appear in the historical record of that region. You build this for the threats that appear in the geological record of the previous 10,000 years. The people of Cappadocia knew something. The question is how they knew it. What if the people who went underground, and the people who built Gobekli Tepe, and the people who oriented the Sphinx toward Leo were all responding to the same knowledge? Not the same culture, not necessarily the same time period, but the same core understanding. That the world had ended once, that it could end again, that the ending came from above and that it was fast, and that the surface of the earth was not a safe place when it happened. That knowledge, if it existed, would not have been confined to one location. It would have spread with the survivors, carried in memory, in ritual, in the structures they built, in the stories they told their children, compressed over generations into myth, preserved in the only formats that survive when everything else is gone, and across every culture on Earth, from Mesopotamia to the Americas to Australia to East Asia, there is a story about a flood. Not just a flood that ended the previous world, a flood that came suddenly, a flood that a small number of people survived by specific preparation while everyone else did not. Over 500 independent versions of this story have been documented, on every inhabited continent, in cultures with no documented contact with each other. 500 independent accounts of the same event. The standard academic response is that flood myths are universal because floods are a universal human experience. Every culture lives near water. Every culture experiences flooding. The myth is a natural response to a natural phenomenon. Here is what that explanation requires you to ignore. 500 cultures did not independently develop the same specific narrative structure. A previous world. A catastrophic flood. A warned survivor. A new beginning. That is not a generic flood story. That is an account of a specific sequence of events. And when 500 independent sources describe the same specific sequence, the explanation that they all invented it separately requires more coincidence than the explanation that they all remembered the same thing. What is the threshold at which independent confirmation becomes evidence? Here is the honest version of the Piri Reis argument, because this is where intellectual honesty matters most. In 1513, an Ottoman admiral named Piri Reis compiled a map. It shows the Atlantic coastlines of Europe and Africa with reasonable accuracy for the period. It also shows a southern landmass that some researchers, most prominently Charles Hapgood in 1965, argued represents Antarctica mapped before its official discovery in 1820. Hapgood went further and suggested the source maps used by Piri Reis depicted Antarctica before it was covered by ice, which would require them to have been made thousands of years ago by an unknown civilization. That is a significant claim, and it is significantly contested. Historians of cartography point out that speculative southern continents were a common feature of maps from this period. The concept of a large southern landmass, called Terra Australis, existed in European geographical theory long before any actual exploration of the southern hemisphere. What Piri Reis shows in the south is more likely a speculative Terra Australis than a mapped Antarctica. The specific coastline features that Hapgood claimed match Antarctica's subglacial topography do not match precisely when examined in detail. That is a fair and legitimate counter-argument. The Piri Reis map does not hold up as strong evidence of a prehistorical, cartographic civilization. Here is what that concession does not change. The map is one data point in a much larger pattern. It stands or falls on its own merits, and on its merits, it is weak. But the geological erosion on the Sphinx does not depend on the Piri Reis map. The nanodiamonds at 12,800 years ago do not depend on it. The astronomical encoding at Gobekli Tepe does not depend on it. The Silurian Hypothesis does not depend on it. Disproving the weakest evidence in a case does not disprove the case. Which piece of the remaining evidence is actually wrong? What does it actually mean that sea levels rose 120 meters? Not as an abstract geological fact, as a physical reality that people experienced in real time. The Ice Age ended gradually between roughly 15,000 and 7,000 years ago. During that period, the global sea level rose 120 meters. That rise was not uniform. It came in pulses. Periods of relative stability followed by rapid jumps when large ice sheets collapsed suddenly into the ocean. One of those pulses, around 14,000 years ago, raised sea levels by roughly 20 meters in a few centuries. Another pulse, possibly connected to the Younger Dryas impact event, caused rapid regional changes in coastal geography across multiple areas simultaneously, 120 meters. To make that concrete, put yourself on a coastline where the sea is currently 120 meters below the level it will reach. The beach in front of you is miles away. There are forests and plains and rivers between you and the water. Communities have been living in that coastal lowland for generations. Then the ice starts melting. First the beach moves, slowly, then faster. The forests begin to flood. The rivers back up. The plains become marshes, then shallows, then open water. Not in a single catastrophic moment. Over generations. But fast enough that a person born on that coast will die watching the sea cover the land where they grew up. The land area lost to the rising ocean between 15,000 and 7,000 years ago was roughly equivalent to the combined landmass of Europe and North America. That is where people lived. That is where civilizations existed, built, traded, and accumulated knowledge over thousands of years. And all of it is now underwater. We have barely explored those submerged regions, not because there is nothing there, because it is difficult and expensive and does not fit the existing framework of where to look for ancient settlements. What are we not finding because we are not looking in the right place? Here is the part that makes the flood myths click into place. You are standing on a coast in 12,000 BCE. Your community has been here for generations. Your grandparents were born here. The stories they told about their grandparents were set here. This is not just where you live. It is your entire conceptual universe, the geography of your world, the location of your sacred sites, your burial grounds, your trading routes, your seasonal patterns, and then the sea starts moving. Not overnight, not in a single catastrophic wave. It moves in pulses. Some years the change is barely noticeable. Then a pulse hits and the low ground floods and does not drain. The river mouths back up. The fishing grounds shift. The beach where the children played last summer is a tidal flat this summer, and open water the summer after that. Your children grow up watching the sea eat the world. Their children grow up in a world already smaller than the one their parents described. And their children grow up with stories about a time before, when the coast was further out, when there was land where the water is now, when the old places still existed. Those stories get told for 10,000 years. They get compressed, elaborated, mythologized. The gradual flooding becomes a single catastrophic event in the retelling, because that is how human memory works with inherited trauma. The complexity of generations of coastal loss becomes the simplicity of a flood that ended the world in a night. 500 versions of this story on every inhabited continent are not a coincidence of independent invention. They are the accumulated memory of one of the largest geographical transformations in human history. The people who lived through it remembered it. Their descendants remembered that they remembered. And the memory outlasted every physical trace of the world that was lost. The ocean ate an entire civilization's worth of coastline. The memory of it is the only thing that survived. What else is in the memory that we have not learned to read yet? What is the geological evidence that the flood myths are describing a real event? All of it. Every piece of it. Sea level data from coral cores, sediment analysis, and coastal geology confirms a 120-meter rise in global sea levels between 15,000 and 7,000 years ago. Rapid pulses of flooding are documented in the geological record at multiple points in that window. The flooding of the Black Sea Basin, once a freshwater lake, through a catastrophic breach of the Bosphorus threshold, is dated to roughly 7,500 years ago, and has been proposed as a regional origin point for multiple Near Eastern flood traditions. The North Sea Basin, which connected Britain to continental Europe as dry land during the Ice Age, flooded progressively throughout this period, with a major inundation event around 8,000 years ago. These are not mythological events. They are geological events with dates and mechanisms and physical records preserved in the sediment. Here is what makes the flood myth convergence significant. The geological events are real and documented. The flood myths are real and documented. And they describe the same category of experience from the human perspective that the geology describes from the physical perspective. Rapid, catastrophic loss of coastal land. A world that existed before the water came and did not exist after. Survivors who carried the memory forward. The myths are not evidence of a supernatural flood. They are evidence that human populations with oral traditions witnessed geological events large enough to define the boundary between their old world and their new one, and that they preserved the memory of those events in the most durable format available to them, which is story. The question is not whether the flood myths describe something real. The geology confirms they do. The question is what else is in those memories that the geology cannot tell us directly. What happened to the people who lived in the drowned lands? Here is what the underwater archaeology of the continental shelves does not yet know, because we have not looked seriously enough to find out. The continental shelves around the world, the shallow areas between the current coastlines and the deep ocean, were largely dry land during the last ice age. They were the coastal plains and river deltas and estuarine zones where human populations concentrate, where food is abundant, where trade routes naturally develop, where civilizations begin. All of it is now underwater, at depths ranging from a few meters to 120 meters, depending on location and the specific history of sea level change in that region. The entire coastal geography of the Ice Age world is sitting on the ocean floor, covered in sediment, in the zone that underwater archaeologists call the drowned landscape. We have found things there. a settlement off the coast of India, dated to roughly 9,500 years ago, sitting under 40 meters of water in the Gulf of Cambay. Stone structures off the coast of Japan at Yonaguni, their origin still disputed. Submerged sites off the coasts of Europe and the Americas that are only beginning to be mapped systematically. What we have not done is treat the continental shelves as the primary location for evidence of prehistorical coastal civilizations. We still treat land sites as the default and underwater sites as exceptional discoveries. But if you understand the sea level history, the opposite logic applies. The most inhabited coastal zones of the Ice Age world are underwater. Land sites from that period, at inland locations, represent the populations that were not on the coasts. The coastal populations, the trading civilizations, the maritime cultures, they are all down there. Here is my position. We have spent more effort and money searching for life on Mars than we have spent systematically searching the continental shelves for evidence of the coastal civilizations of the Ice Age world. Those shelves are close. They are accessible with current technology. They contain the drowned geography of a human world that existed for tens of thousands of years and ended when the ice melted. What are we going to find when we actually look? Now look at today. Not at ancient history. Not at the geological past. At the numbers being published right now in current climate science, and what they look like when you place them next to the data we have been examining for the last hour. The rate of carbon dioxide increase in the atmosphere, measured in parts per million per year, is currently faster than at any point in the last 800,000 years of ice core data. The isotopic signature of that carbon is biological in origin. It comes from burning ancient organic deposits. The global average temperature has increased by roughly 1.2 degrees Celsius since pre-industrial levels and is projected to increase by 2 to 4 degrees more by the end of this century under current trajectories. Now place those numbers next to the PETM, carbon release with a biological isotopic signature. Temperature increase of 5 to 8 degrees over the course of the event. Disruption of ocean chemistry. Collapse of ecosystems adapted to stable conditions. We are not at PETM levels. We are at the beginning of the range where PETM-type dynamics start. The rate of change is comparable. The direction is the same. The mechanism, burning ancient organic carbon and releasing it into the atmosphere rapidly, is identical. Here is the part that turns this from a climate discussion into something more specific. If the PETM had an industrial component, then the record of that event is a record of what happens when a civilization overshoots the carbon budget of its planet. The event ends with mass extinction and a 200,000-year recovery period. Whatever produced that carbon spike did not survive to see the planet stabilize. The chemical record ends with the spike. We are in the early stages of producing the same chemical record, with instruments sensitive enough to watch ourselves do it in real time. And the institutional response to that observation is the same institutional response that greets every uncomfortable question in this story. Careful acknowledgement, extensive study, and a conspicuous absence of the most direct conclusion the data supports. How many times does the pattern have to repeat before we name it? Why are scientists terrified? Not in the way the title of this video implies. Not running through corridors, not holding emergency press conferences, not losing sleep over ancient mysteries. Terrified in the specific way that people who understand systems are terrified when they see a system approaching a boundary they recognize. The researchers who study the PETM know what the carbon signature means. They know the volume gap exists. They publish papers with careful language about uncertainties and further research needed. They do not publish papers with the direct conclusion that the most parsimonious explanation for the PETM anomalies includes an industrial component, because publishing that conclusion requires building a career on a foundation that the field is not ready to support. The researchers who study the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis know that their evidence is solid. They have replicated the nanodiamond findings. They have confirmed the iridium. They have the crater under the Greenland ice, they publish in legitimate journals, and they spend significant portions of their careers defending themselves against institutional resistance that has nothing to do with the quality of their evidence. Frank and Schmidt asked their question formally in a peer-reviewed journal with full academic rigor. And then nothing happened. 7 years of nothing. In a field that generates thousands of papers per year. Here is what terrified looks like inside a scientific institution. It does not look like panic. It looks like a question that gets asked once and not followed up. It looks like a gap in the literature that everyone cites and nobody pursues. It looks like a finding that gets replicated and disputed and replicated again and never reaches consensus. Not because the evidence is weak, but because the consensus would require acknowledging something that changes what we thought we knew about our position in time. The terror is not about ancient civilizations. It is about what the pattern implies for the civilization currently running the experiment. We are not the first species on this planet sophisticated enough to alter its atmosphere. We might be the first one doing it with the ability to recognize what it means. And recognizing what it means has not changed what we are doing. What does it mean to understand a warning and continue anyway? Here is the physical reality that sits underneath all of this. The Earth's climate is not a stable system that human activity is disturbing. It is a dynamic system with natural cycles, and human activity is adding a new variable to those cycles, whose net effect we do not fully understand. The Milankovitch cycles, changes in Earth's orbital parameters that repeat on timescales of tens to hundreds of thousands of years, drive the rhythm of ice ages and warm periods. They are predictable. They are calculable. Geologically, we are currently in a warm interglacial period, the kind that has occurred repeatedly throughout the Ice Age era and has, without exception, ended in a return to glacial conditions. Every previous interglacial ended, not because of catastrophe, because the orbital mechanics eventually shifted the energy balance enough to tip the system back toward cold. We are adding carbon to a system that already has its own long-term trajectory. The carbon delays the glacial return. It adds warming on top of interglacial warming. It changes the chemistry of the oceans. And it does all of this in a geological instant, faster than the natural system has time to buffer and absorb. What we do not know is where the boundaries are. At what point does added carbon push the system into a configuration it has not been in for millions of years? At what point do the feedback loops, melting permafrost releasing methane, warming oceans releasing stored carbon, ice loss reducing planetary reflectivity, become self-sustaining? At what point does the system stop responding to what we do, and start responding only to its own internal dynamics? The PETM may be an answer to that question. Not a comfortable one. The PETM carbon release, whatever caused it, pushed the system into exactly that kind of self-sustaining state. The warming continued long after the initial carbon input ended. The system had crossed a threshold, and it took 200,000 years to find a new equilibrium. We are currently accelerating toward the threshold, whose location we do not know. What happens when you approach a boundary you cannot see until you have already crossed it? You are living inside the event, not watching it, not studying it from a safe historical distance, inside it. Right now, this year, this decade, the carbon concentration in the atmosphere is at a level not seen in millions of years and rising at a rate not seen in the entire ice core record. The temperature is increasing. The ocean chemistry is shifting. The feedback mechanisms are beginning to activate. You are the civilization that is generating the geological signal. In 50 million years, if something develops on this planet with the cognitive capacity to read the chemical record, they will find a layer. A thin band in the rock where the isotopic composition of carbon changed rapidly, where certain trace metals are anomalously concentrated, where the biological signature of the atmosphere shifted in a geologically brief window. They will study that layer the way we study the PETM. They will try to explain it. They will find that the natural mechanisms they can identify do not fully account for the volume and the rate of change. And they will leave a gap in the explanation. That gap will be us. Here is what that means concretely. The choice you make about how to respond to what you are learning right now, what systems you support, what you demand from the institutions that govern energy and industry and land use, will determine the depth of that layer. It will determine whether the layer has the profile of a civilization that recognized the pattern and changed course, or the profile of a civilization that recognized the pattern and continued anyway. The PETM layer, whoever or whatever made it, has the profile of something that did not change course. The event peaked, the temperature maxed out, the extinctions happened, and then slowly, over 200,000 years, the system recovered. We are the first civilization in Earth's history that can read the record of what happened before us and understand what it means for what we are doing now. What do we do with that? Here is the thought experiment that closes this. Imagine a civilization 56 million years ago. They are not human. They do not look like us. They do not think like us. But they have developed the capacity to extract energy from their planet's stored biological deposits and use that energy to build, to expand, to alter their environment. They have been doing it long enough that the chemistry of their atmosphere has shifted measurably. Their planet is warming, their oceans are acidifying. They know this is happening. They have the instruments to measure it. They have researchers who study the data and publish their findings and present at conferences and write carefully worded papers about uncertainties and further research needed. And then something happens. Maybe the warming crossed a threshold they did not see coming. Maybe a separate catastrophic event, an impact, a volcanic event, an internal feedback they had not modeled, accelerated the process beyond any point where response was possible. Maybe they ran out of time between recognizing the problem and the problem becoming irreversible. We do not know which, because all that remains is the layer. The carbon spike, the temperature record, the extinction horizon, and a gap in the explanation that researchers on the other side of 56 million years of geological time have been trying to close for 30 years. Now here is the question that has no comfortable answer. Or, if that civilization had known, in the decade before the threshold was crossed, exactly what we know now about climate dynamics and feedback systems, and the geological record of previous rapid warming events, would it have changed anything? Did knowledge save them? And if it did not save them, what makes us think knowledge alone will save us? What will remain of us? Not of our culture or our technology or our accumulated knowledge, of our physical presence on this planet. What survives the geological processing of 50 million years and remains readable to whatever comes after? The carbon signal, locked into carbonate rocks and ocean sediment globally, elevated above the pre-industrial baseline by an amount that will remain detectable long after every other trace of our existence is gone, with a biological isotopic signature pointing to burned ancient organic deposits. Rapid in geological terms, large in volume, the clearest signal we will leave. Anomalous trace metal concentrations at specific locations. Where our cities were, where our mines operated, where our industrial facilities processed materials in ways that concentrated rare elements beyond their natural distribution. These anomalies will persist in the rock for tens of millions of years. They will not be identifiable as cities. They will be readable as chemical anomalies in a narrow layer, possibly a radioactive signature. The isotopes from nuclear activity have half-lives in the thousands to millions of years. Some of them will still be detectable after tens of millions of years of decay, as anomalous ratios in specific geological formations. Without context, they will look like natural isotopic variation. That is the complete inventory. That is everything we will leave behind that survives 50 million years of geological time. No structures, no records, no indication of the scale and complexity of what we built and knew and lost. Just chemistry. Just numbers in a layer of rock that require interpretation to mean anything at all. Here's what those numbers will look like to whoever reads them. a rapid carbon event with a biological isotopic signature and a volume that their models may or may not fully account for. An anomalous layer of trace metals at specific global locations. A possible radioactive signature requiring explanation. Sound familiar? We are writing the PETM right now, in real time, with full awareness of what we are writing. What happens when the next civilization finds our layer? They will study it the way we study the PETM, extensively, carefully, with precision instruments we cannot yet imagine. They will measure the carbon isotopes. They will note the biological signature. They will calculate the volume and compare it to the natural mechanisms available in their geological models. And they will find, as we have found with the PETM, that the known natural sources do not fully account for what is in the rock. They will have a gap. Some researcher among them, with the same intellectual courage that Frank and Schmidt showed in 2018, will publish a paper asking the formal question: could this layer represent the output of an industrial civilization that existed at this point in Earth's history? They will model what would survive 50 million years of geological processing. They will conclude, as Frank and Schmidt concluded, that almost nothing survives in identifiable form, just chemistry. And they will look at the chemistry in the layer and note that it fits. And then they will wait for the response from their field. Here is what I think that response will be. The same response Frank and Schmidt got: acknowledgement, careful citation, and a conspicuous absence of follow-up. Because the follow-up requires asking questions that the institutional framework is not built to support. Because the conclusion is uncomfortable. Because admitting that something was here before them means admitting that the universe runs this experiment more than once, and that running it more than once does not guarantee a different outcome. We are going to be someone else's unanswered question, someone else's gap in the literature, someone else's Frank and Schmidt paper sitting in a journal with a handful of citations and 7 years of institutional silence. The only thing we do not know is whether they will be asking the question because we left just the chemical layer, or because we left the chemical layer and survived to leave something more. What do you want the layer to say? Something was here before us. Maybe. The data fits. The gaps are real. The framework that connects them has been published and largely ignored. That is the honest state of the evidence. But here is what is not maybe. The geological record does not make exceptions. It has processed every civilization, every species, every ecosystem that has ever existed on this planet with the same indifference. Chemistry survives. Everything else degrades. Whatever came before us left a layer, and the layer either has an explanation we have found, or an explanation we have not found yet, or an explanation that makes us deeply uncomfortable about what it implies. We are leaving a layer right now. The chemistry is being written into the rock in real time. The carbon is accumulating. The isotopic signature is being locked into sediment on the ocean floor at this moment, at this depth, in this decade. Whatever we do from here determines what that layer looks like to the next reader. Here is what we know with certainty. The Milankovitch cycles will continue. The interglacial will eventually end one way or another. The planet will continue its long-term climate dynamics, regardless of what we do or do not do. The geological record will continue to be written. And somewhere in the next 100 million years, the conditions for complex life will reassert themselves, and something will develop the capacity to read the record we are leaving. What we do not know is what they will conclude when they read it. Whether they will find a carbon spike that peaked and then declined as the civilization that caused it recognized the pattern and changed course. Or whether they will find a spike that continued until the system crossed a threshold and the recovery took 200,000 years. They will ask the same question we are asking about the PETM. What caused this? What was here? What happened to it? We already know the answer to those questions for ourselves. We are the civilization that caused our layer. We are what is here. What happens to us is still being written. The layer is the only message that survives geological time. Make sure it says something worth finding.